My name is Natalie Brooks, and for most of my adult life I believed that if I worked hard enough, my parents would eventually recognize what I had done for our family. I was wrong. Our family business, Brooks Home Furnishings, had started as a tiny furniture workshop opened by my grandfather nearly 40 years earlier. By the time I was 19, I was already spending most of my afternoons there after college. I answered phones, cleaned the showroom, organized invoices, helped customers, and eventually learned how to manage the books. Nobody forced me to do it. I genuinely loved the business. My grandfather used to tell me that a company wasn't just a building full of products. It was the people, the reputation, and the trust built over years. My younger sister Claire saw things very differently. She rarely came to the office. She preferred traveling, shopping, and posting pictures online. Yet somehow, whenever my parents talked about the future, they talked about Claire. She has the confidence to run a company, Mom would say. I never understood what she meant. Confidence wasn't the same thing as experience, but I kept working. When our biggest supplier threatened to cancel our contract, I spent 3 weeks negotiating a new agreement. When our accounting system crashed, I stayed at the office until almost midnight rebuilding records. When sales dropped, I created a new online ordering system that eventually brought in thousands of dollars in additional revenue. My parents thanked me, but they never seemed impressed. Claire could walk into the office wearing expensive clothes, say hello to a few customers, and my mother would immediately tell everyone how naturally she understood business. Then came the morning that changed everything. Dad called me into his office and asked me to sit down. Mom was already there. Claire sat beside her smiling. I knew immediately that something was wrong. Dad placed a folder on the desk and said, "We've made a decision about the future of the company." I smiled nervously. "Okay, what decision?" He looked at Claire. "We're transferring control of the business to your sister." For several seconds I couldn't speak. I thought I had misunderstood him. "You mean eventually?" I asked. "No," Mom replied. "Starting next month." I looked at Dad. "What about me?" He sighed as if I were asking something unreasonable. "Natalie, you've done a lot for this company, but Claire has the personality for leadership." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I've worked here for almost 10 years. Claire interrupted with a smile. "And nobody is taking that away from you." I looked at her. "You're taking away my position." She shrugged. "It's just business." Those 3 words hurt more than anything else. Just business. The same business I had sacrificed weekends for. The same business I had helped save during difficult years. The same business my grandfather had built with his own hands. I asked my parents why they had never discussed it with me. Dad simply said, "We knew you'd make this emotional." That evening I went home and cried for the first time in years, not because I wanted everything. I only wanted to feel like my work mattered. A week later, Claire arrived at the office as the new acting director. She immediately started changing things. She ordered expensive furniture for her office, replaced the old accounting software, and began spending company money without checking the budget. I tried to warn her. "You need to be careful with cash flow," I told her. She laughed. "You're always worried about something." Then she removed 2 employees who had worked there for years simply because she didn't like them. When I questioned the decision, Mom told me to stop interfering. A few days later, Claire called me into her office. "We're restructuring," she said. "Your position is being eliminated." I stared at her. "You're firing me," she smiled. "I'm making a leadership decision." I packed my belongings into one cardboard box. Before leaving, I walked through the showroom one last time. I touched the old wooden counter where Grandpa used to sit and remembered something he had told me years earlier. I had been about 20 when he took me into the basement to clean some old storage shelves. Behind a cabinet was a small metal safe. I had asked him what was inside. He smiled and said, "Things that belong to the future." I laughed and asked him what that meant. He simply replied, "You'll understand when the right time comes." I had completely forgotten about that safe until the day I was fired. I returned to the office one final time to collect a box I had accidentally left behind. While walking through the basement, I noticed that one of the old cabinets had been moved. Behind it was a narrow metal door. My heart started beating faster. I pulled it open and there it was, the same old safe I remembered from my childhood. Dust covered the top, but the lock was intact. I had no idea why I suddenly felt that finding it mattered. I searched the old desk nearby and discovered a faded envelope stuck underneath one of the drawers. Inside was a handwritten note from Grandpa. It contained 3 numbers. I tried them on the safe. The first attempt failed. The second failed. On the third attempt, the lock clicked. The door opened. Inside were several folders, old bank statements, property documents, company records, and one sealed envelope with my full name written across the front. I sat on the basement floor before opening it. The letter was dated years earlier. Grandpa explained that he had always known my parents would eventually try to hand the company to Claire. He had watched how I worked, how I handled difficult customers, how I protected employees, and how I treated the business as something worth preserving. He had therefore created a legal ownership agreement. The majority controlling shares had been placed into a protected family trust, with me designated as the future controlling owner if the business was transferred against the terms of his original agreement. I read the sentence twice because I couldn't believe it. My parents had transferred the business to Claire, but according to Grandpa's documents, they had never possessed the authority to transfer the controlling shares. There was more. A second folder contained records of a separate reserve account that Grandpa had established years earlier. It contained more than $600,000. My parents had apparently never known about it. I immediately took everything to an attorney. She spent almost 2 hours reviewing the documents in silence. Finally, she looked up at me. "Natalie, do you understand what your grandfather did?" I shook my head. She pointed to the documents. "He protected the company from exactly what happened this week." She explained that the ownership agreement was legally binding and that my parents' attempt to give Claire complete control could be challenged. The next morning, the attorney contacted my parents. They were furious. Dad accused me of trying to destroy the family. Mom said I was being selfish. Claire demanded to know why Grandpa would ever choose me over her. I finally answered, "Because he watched what I did when nobody else was watching." Claire went silent. Then she insisted that the documents must be fake. The attorney produced the original registration records, Grandpa's signatures, witness statements, and the trust documents. There was no argument left. Claire had been given a title, but she had never been given control of the majority ownership. My parents had assumed that because I had been quiet for years, I would stay quiet forever. They were wrong. I didn't take revenge. I didn't throw Claire out. Instead, I offered her a chance to remain with the company under one condition. She would have to earn her position just like everyone else. She accepted, although it took months before she stopped treating me like an enemy. As for my parents, I allowed them to remain as advisors, but they no longer had authority over financial decisions. The company slowly recovered from Claire's mistakes. We rehired the employees she had dismissed, restored our supplier relationships, and invested part of the reserve fund into expanding our online business. Within a year, sales were higher than they had ever been. One afternoon, I stood in the same basement where I had discovered the safe. I opened it and looked at the empty space where Grandpa's documents had been. I finally understood what he meant all those years ago when he said some things belonged to the future. He hadn't been talking about money. He had been talking about trust. My parents had spent years assuming that Claire deserved everything simply because she was their favorite. Grandpa had seen something they refused to see. He had seen that I didn't need to be given power. I had already earned it. And the greatest lesson wasn't that I had inherited control of the family business. It was that sometimes the people who underestimate you are the very people who make you discover how strong you really are. My parents wanted me to walk away quietly. Claire expected me to disappear. Instead, I opened the forgotten safe and discovered that my grandfather had been protecting my future all along.